Greetings everyone, my name is Sai, and Pokemonth has begun! And what better way to begin this celebration of Pokemon than by complaining about it? So, the central topic of today's discussion is, should Pokemon games have a hard mode? Now, initially my answer to that was, duh, obviously it should. I mean, why not? But upon consideration, it is a bit more complicated than that. Of course, Nintendo has historically been a company that's primarily marketed to kids, especially back in the 80s and 90s, but their games have always had a sort of mass appeal to all ages. And this idea that Nintendo games are easy by default to compensate for the kids playing hasn't always been the case. I mean, back in the days of the NES, there was even a term for this, games described as being Nintendo hard. And gee, that seems almost quaint to think about now, doesn't it? You see, back in the day, developers couldn't really fit complex stories or huge open worlds into their game, and so to keep players from just breezing through them in an afternoon, they were made insanely hard. These days, though, I think Nintendo is a lot better at striking a balance between the hardcore and casual audiences. For example, in the new Fire Emblem Awakening game, Nintendo added an option to choose how character death worked. You could set it to classic mode, so if they died in combat, they were dead forever, or more likely, the few seconds it took for you to hard reset the DS and restart the match, or have it so that when they die, they just sort of retreat to the sidelines for the rest of the fight, and are raring to go in the next battle. And I think that's a good compromise. But like with all things, Pokemon is forever scared of changing anything in their Golden Goose formula. Well, I say that, but Pokemon has dabbled in difficulty modes before. Most notably in Pokemon Red and Blue, which had a hidden difficulty system in the form of which starter you chose. Because your starter in Pokemon is most important during the first few hours of the game, and the first two gym leaders of Red and Blue are Rock-type and Water-type, picking Bulbasaur was kind of your easy mode, if you will, because he resists both types while also being super effective against them. Squirtle, meanwhile, resists both types, but is only super effective versus Brock's Rock-type Pokemon, making him sort of your medium mode. And finally, Charmander is actually weak against both Rock-type and Water-type, which makes him your, albeit very unusual, hard mode. And the idea sort of persisted into Gen 2, but we really haven't had as much emphasis put on that type of difficulty since. But honestly, I'm not too bothered by that. I mean, yeah, it's a cool bit of design, and I can certainly appreciate the ingenuity and cleverness of implementation, but the heart and soul of a Pokemon game is forming bonds with your trusty companions of your choosing, and the starters are sort of the poster children for that. So designing the game around also making them difficulty choices kind of diminishes that. However, years later, GameFreak did sort of move in that direction again in Pokemon Black and White 2, which actually did have a standard hard mode. Of course, it was also one that only unlocked after you beat the entire game, or at least had a friend who did, and then they immediately removed this feature in the very next Pokemon game, so not so much a step in a bold new direction as it is making concentric circles around their pre-existing comfort zone. But it's obvious that people want a hard mode at least. That's the whole point of things like Nuzlocke runs, and there are probably 5 times as many Nuzlocke Let's Plays in the world than of the standard game. So people are already going extremely out of their way, forcing limits upon themselves the game was not designed to support, just because they want that extra bit of challenge. In fact, it's such a popular idea that some Pokemon fan games like Pokemon Insurgence and Pokemon Uranium actually have built-in Nuzlocke modes. Speaking of, Pokemon Insurgence actually has even more than that, with the inclusion of challenge modes, the most interesting of which to me is by far the Mystery Challenge mode. Basically, it makes it so that any Pokemon encountered will appear with a blurry sprite and name until they're caught and registered inside the Pokedex. But when talking about adding additional challenge into Pokemon games, we need to be very, very specific about what exactly we want here. Because whenever I see people bring up the topic of Game Freak implementing hard modes into the games, someone invariably says, well, if you want some extra challenge, just turn off the automatic EXP share. Now, let me be clear. This is the worst possible way to add challenge to a Pokemon game, because all that makes you do is grind more, and grinding isn't fun or challenging. So, how do we make a good hard mode then? Well, first of all, I like what they did in Black and White too. Hard mode in that increased the level of most Pokemon, made the AI a bit smarter, and usually added another Pokemon to a gym leader's roster. And I suppose we could also get some official implementation of the challenge runs from fan games like Insurgents. But another brand new idea I haven't seen anyone do yet is limit how much money you get from winning battles, while also making items more rare and expensive. For me personally, I always end my Pokemon runs with tens of thousands of unspent money because I barely ever needed anything more than what I picked up off the side of the road. So that would make Pokemarts way more important than they are right now. Every potion would count, and suddenly, things like stat boosting items and berries would have a real use outside of competitive environments. And if we want to be extra dicks about it, we could also make the Pokemon Centers charge money to heal in this mode, and disable automatic healing in PCs. Or maybe we could have a game mode that enforced a level cap on your Pokemon. Like, you know how certain Pokemon won't obey you until you have X Gym Badge? Well, this could sort of be like that. Your Pokemon are locked at X level, unable to gain any more experience until you have Y Badge. That would mean you couldn't just overlevel your team and raffle stomp everything in your path, while also making gym battles feel more epic and involved. And at that point, it stops just being a, well, this gym leader uses rock-type Pokemon, so my water starter could just one-hit KO your entire team. So hopefully, I've given you guys some ideas of what Game Freak and Nintendo could do with the franchise in order to spice it up a bit for us veteran players. Of course, self-imposed rules could still accomplish most of what I've talked about here, but I would still vastly prefer the game supporting stuff like this from the ground up. I think that would make the games far more interesting for longtime fans looking for something new and exciting. But because this would all be sectioned off under an options menu or a cheat code or something, it would have no effect on anyone who wasn't directly seeking out a harder run. It's a win-win, and I think that everyone would be happier for it. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. This was, of course, the first video in a series of Pokemon-themed videos I'll be making this month, so stay tuned for that. Speaking of which, I've got a t-shirt for sale. It's available this month only, and then will go away forever, so grab it while you can. And finally, my wonderful Patreon patrons are what allow me to make videos full-time. So if you want to see more videos like this, go check that out at patreon.com/Psy and see if anything I have to offer catches your eye. Speaking of, I want to give a very, very special thank you to my $10 plus Patreon patrons: Isaiah Christo, Aaron Graff, Saws Bucky, Krista, Killy, and Forgotten Paladin for helping support my endeavors. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.